Hey people. So it's been a while. I am well aware of the fact that I said I'd have chapter 4 up soon, and that was how many months ago? Yeah, that was back in June. I do apologize, but I moved far, far away, and it's taken a little while with the new job and settled and all that jazz to finally be able to record again. I apologize if the audio quality is really, really bad, or at least worse than it was. My new place does not have the best acoustics. It's good for singing or talking to myself, but in a professional recording, not so much. I'm doing what I can to make it sound better. I'm currently wearing my attempt at a Sith Lord costume with the hood only marred by the fact that it is bright pink. But I want to at least think it helps. After all, without it on, this is what I sound like, which I don't know if it comes across in the recording, but there is definitely more of an echo that I can hear in my room. So yeah, hopefully with the hood it's better. And let's get into chapter 4, which should be an eventful one. Chapter 4. I preferred to go to a supermarket in a direction away from Framingham because the extra 3 miles it took to drive along this isolated road more than made up for the waiting in Framingham traffic. It was on this road that 3 cars ahead of me suddenly drew abreast of each other and stopped. I was forced to stop too. 6 men with handguns drawn got out of these cars and surrounded me. "Get out of the car," the one man ordered. I got out just as a van pulled up from behind. It was a large van with 3 bench seats. "Get in," someone yelled as the door to the middle seat opened. I got in, sat down, and found myself surrounded by men pointing guns at me, 3 behind me and 2 more in the front seat. "Isn't this overdoing it?" I asked. "We have our orders." The van started moving, and I looked around at what might be my last look at familiar surroundings. I'd known for a year that the president was stewing over me, and a struggle seemed pointless. We drove a couple miles to a field where 2 military helicopters were waiting. "Follow us," said one of the goons. I got out of the van and followed them to the nearest helicopter. It was some kind of VIP transportation helicopter, with seats looking forward like an airplane's. It was probably used to haul some general's butts around to important military spots like Las Vegas and Disney World. I sat in the seat they indicated and was strapped in. Both helicopters took off and headed south. We passed within sight of my car, still on the road a quarter mile below. It was surrounded by dozens of cars and trucks. People were standing around and talking about what happened. Even in the helicopter, they kept several guns on me. They must have suspected I had powers I didn't admit. Well, I did. We headed south over water at a slight angle to the east. I could see the Massachusetts and Rhode Island coastlines in the distance. "Where are you taking me?" "To an aircraft carrier," answered one of the men holding guns on me. "Am I coming back?" "No." There it was, the death sentence. This was the last I'd see of Massachusetts. My face softened and tears gathered in my eyes. How many thousands of stories had I seen on the news about young people like myself being killed by murderers or in accidents, and I didn't think about it long. Now it was my turn to face death. Death! Death at 18! My mind could scarcely believe it. The unfairness of it made my body shake with revulsion. Dead at the peak of my beauty and youth, when I was just beginning to taste the best that life offered. I was a little angry for a moment, but returned to sorrow. But I didn't cry. I wasn't a phony movie actress using hysterics to milk all the drama she could get out of every moment. I was a real person, and I didn't give a damn what these kidnappers thought. I'd had years to consider something like this might happen one day. Besides, I had a solid upbringing. I'd been taught that this life was just the beginning. Death wasn't the end. It was the start of a wonderful eternity. Still, it was natural to mourn the loss of this world. These guys probably had never told a girl she was going to be killed and must have expected a soap opera scene. I gave them Navy SEAL. They said a few words to each other once in a while. I noted their voices softened. I sensed I'd won their admiration. Time passed. I waxed poetic. This trip was analogous to a journey through life. I could see the thousands of buildings below with their tens of thousands of people, and this was like a journey to see the world. All those people down there going through their daily routines didn't give a thought to the meaning of it all, but I did now, maybe a little too late. The helicopters headed south, approximately parallel to the east coast. Beaches and cities could be seen on the right. I could no longer recognize them. How are you going to do it?
You'll be put in a plane with an atom bomb.
My eyebrows went up a little. Wouldn't a bullet save taxpayers $100 million? But then I realized that they wanted to destroy Hal, not me. And everybody said nothing could survive an A-bomb. When is this going to happen?
Tomorrow afternoon. It's far away.
They were becoming more talkative. Apparently, they were relieved that I hadn't put on the hysterical scene they expected. I had a day to think of something, if anything could be done. What did they tell you about me?
You're a danger to the security of the United States.
How?
They didn't say. No need to know.
They didn't know about Hal. Should I tell them and demonstrate the strength Hal gave me? No. That would definitely convince them I was dangerous, and the president knew what he was doing. My chances were better leaving them in the dark. They might chicken out at the last minute and let me go. I remained quiet after learning of my death sentence while the helicopters continued down the coast. I couldn't recognize the landscapes. The helicopters landed for refueling at some military airbase next to some nondescript building that might have been used for anything. I was allowed to use the restroom with a warning that armed guards had the building surrounded and I couldn't escape. The fully fueled helicopters took off again. I let my mind wander aimlessly over the incidents of my short stay on Earth. In retrospect, I'd had a charmed life. Nothing had happened to me. No attacks by sex-crazed boys. No illnesses. No traffic accidents. No run-ins with the police. Nothing. If I were to write my autobiography now, I'd write 3 lines. I was born. I had a good time. I was vaporized by a bomb. The negative incidents I remembered, mostly childhood experiences, were so trivial in nature, they wouldn't be worth telling in a letter. An ill-tempered dog barked and lunged at me, but did not touch me. From this I had no love for dogs. When I was 12, and in my mother's car, I saw a traffic accident a short distance in front of us. Everybody drives by hundreds of accidents after they happen, but rare was the person who actually saw one happen. It was a grisly scene. A head-on collision with one driver instantly killed and 2 other people severely injured. Mom had to be a witness in court. This experience shook me up for a while. Other than that, my life had been an amalgam of routines. And this is what made up a life, not the spectacular events that make the news. I'd been satisfied with my quiet life. After 3 helicopter flights, we finally ended the day's traveling at some kind of airbase far south. Maybe we were in Florida or somewhere around there. It had been dark for a while, and I couldn't recognize cities from lights alone. The East Coast was nearly continuously densely packed residential areas with lights everywhere. Not one person down there knew what was happening to me. I figured out why we were in helicopters. A chopper could land anywhere, such as this quiet part of the airbase, where planes had to land at the airstrip with lots of people watching. They marched me to another one of those nondescript military buildings that only had numbers on them. Building number 39 turned out to be a cafeteria. It was late and no crew was on duty. The government men told me they'd arranged for food to be left out, and I could help myself. I grabbed a tray while looking down the line. There was a beverage dispensing cabinet at the end. Hopefully it had plastic bottles. I walked along and picked up 2 tuna sandwiches, a piece of chocolate cake, an 8-ounce carton of milk, and a cup of coffee. Finally, I arrived at the beverage dispenser. It was the size of a refrigerator and had a glass door you could open and grab a drink from a shelf. There were 20-ounce bottles of Coke in there. I grabbed 12 bottles and put them on my tray. The men guarding me dismissed this as the irrational behavior of someone who knew she'd die in hours. One could not expect much better. A few feet beyond the end of the cafeteria line was a garbage can. Leaving my tray on the end of the slide shelf for a moment, I walked to the garbage can to retrieve the garbage bag. It was after hours, and the crew had cleaned up and put a new bag in before leaving. I pulled up the plastic bag and returned to my tray to put 11 of the 12 Coke bottles in the bag. Then I sat at the nearest table to eat. The men watching me, 3 of them aiming guns at all times, were impressed by my calm. 1,000 miles from home, and anybody I wanted to see, surrounded by executioners. I ate methodically, keeping my eyes down as if I were alone in the room. I glanced at them once in a while. Hardened as they were by a cruel world, their eyes softened at the sight of me. Perhaps they had daughters. How could they justify this? Building 39 had a cot in the back office. They took me to it.
Try to get some sleep,
I was told.
We leave at 4 a.m.
They left me alone. No doubt they had every escape route guarded. I could have easily killed all of them by throwing hard objects at them. But where could I go? An army would be sent out looking for me. I laid down on the cot and slipped the garbage bag of Coke bottles under the blanket so it couldn't be removed without disturbing me. What was I to think about for the next 6 hours? My first thoughts were of Steve. I smiled as I recalled how awkward he looked when he walked into my dormitory room for the first time. I wore that flimsy little black dress outfit and wondered if he'd attack me or run for his life. He handled it well. Before long, people saw how hard we'd fallen for each other. Girls asked if we'd been to bed. That was none of their business, but in fact, we did wait for marriage. We knew we had something special and didn't want him to spoil it with regrets.
Wake up. It's 4 o'clock.
God, I'd fallen asleep. The whole night was wasted. I was put in a car and driven to a landing strip while it was still dark. We got into a twin turboprop used for short commutes between minor airports. It had 14 seats in single rows separated by an aisle. It was too small for an enclosed cockpit. In fact, I could see over the pilot and co-pilot's shoulders through the windshield for a spectacular view. As we headed out to sea, the government men finally put away their guns. They weren't needed. From this point on, there was no escape. I spoke for the first time since they put me in the first helicopter. I have to know, exactly when does the bomb go off?
When you reach 60,000 feet.
They go that high?
They can reach 100,000 for a few seconds. Reminds me.
He held up an airman's jumpsuit, a one-piece covering something like the thermal underwear used by northern outdoor workers in the winter.
You'll have this if you want it. It gets cold like you wouldn't believe up there.
Thanks. I will. It fit in perfectly with my plan. I looked away so they wouldn't see my interest. This was the last time I spoke to them. Perhaps it was moving away from land, but for the moment, Steve and my parents seemed in another world that I had already left. There was nothing they could do for me. I turned to thoughts of my eternity. When pushed to the brink, someone can panic or despair or hope. I had always believed. Some people said they had doubts about God. I pitied them. How could they have doubts? Simple reasoning told me the universe could not be in the form it was without design. It might be a chaos, but the beautiful way it was ordered, against 1,000,000,000,000 to 1 odds of elements just happening to have exactly the properties needed to sustain life, could only be somebody's design. Besides that, people's intellects could not be material alone, and could not be hardwired to understand any concept presented to it. The human mind held universal ideals beyond the reach of matter and evolution. The intellect could not be made of matter, nor could the human soul operate on its own, an omniscient and omnipotent intelligence to move its thoughts. But most of all, the unselfish, self-sacrificing goodness of my mother, father, and Steve was not something that could exist in animals. When Socrates was in prison waiting to be executed, his friend Crito urged him to escape and go to another country. Socrates said he enjoyed living in Athens all his life and owed everything to Athens. If he ran away, then he would be betraying the decisions of Athens' people, even if it was wrong in his case. If we want the life God gives us, we must accept the bad along with the good. That is a life well spent. I recited a prayer in my mind as best I could, remembering it. It was not a standard church prayer, but it was fitting for the end. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in green pastures. He leadeth me to still waters. Though I walk through the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The flight lasted hours. I'd grown tired of thinking hard and let my mind wander through simple memories. My time had run out. The important issues were settled. My name was written in the book. There was nothing left to do. I saw an aircraft carrier and its half-dozen support ships many miles in the distance. So this was the end. But strangely, I was not afraid. I was past that.
This is a refueling stop, said the nearest government man. Our destination is further on.
He got up and moved closer to me.
When we land, the plane stops with a jolt. It can break your neck. We have to get you ready.
He and his partner got to work. They buckled the seat belt across my hips. They stuffed large pillows in front of my legs until they were packed in so tightly they couldn't slip a hand in.
Raise your arms,
I was told. I did, and they unrolled a long belt, wrapping around the seat in my armpits, and secured it high on my chest.
Put your hands on your forehead.
I did.
When we approach the deck, close your eyes and push back on your forehead hard, or you could break your neck. Can you remember that?
I nodded. We descended and slowed down. It was somewhat dramatic to watch the approach to the carrier deck. Few people had experienced this.
60 seconds,
said the pilot over the intercom. Groups of soldiers could be seen on the edge of the deck furthest from the landing strip.
30 seconds.
The sailors disappeared over the deck's edge, although they could keep their heads up to watch the landing.
15 seconds.
I put my hands to my forehead.
5 seconds.
I closed my eyes. The wheels hit the deck and squealed. The tail hooks snarled the cable, and the plane decelerated from 110 miles per hour to 0 in a second. The G-forces were incredible. It felt like a giant was trying to rip my arms out of their sockets. My head floated around a bit because I was dizzy.
"You did well," said one of them.
He came over to remove my chest harness and the pillows packed in front of my legs. A vehicle that looked like a small tanker truck rolled out, and the plane was refueled. Then the plane taxied up to the catapult cable. The catapult was a large piston and cylinder hidden under the deck that was powered by steam. When it was activated, steam pushed the piston down the long cylinder, and the piston pulled a cable attached to a hook at the front of the plane. The cable was attached. The engines were revved up to max, and we took off from 0 to 120 miles per hour in 3.5 seconds. I was crushed back in my seat. No wonder pilots like the thrill of their job.
"That was nothing,"
said the man to my left.
"Wait until the jet take off."
I rolled my eyes to heaven. These guys had to be crazy. Did they think I was enjoying this adventure? I was getting tired of it. It seemed like a week since they forced me out of the car. I just wanted to get this business done. I checked my watch. 3 o'clock. It was another long, boring flight which left my tired mind nearly blank. I'd almost forgotten what the trip was for. Through blurry eyes, I saw the second carrier in the distance. The procedure was the same. Pillows were tightly packed in front of my legs. The chest harness was secured. I was reminded about closing my eyes and pushing on the back of my head. We landed with the same instant stop. This was the end of the line. They removed the pillows and belts and handed me the jumpsuit. I stepped in the aisle to put it on. I picked up the garbage bag of Coke bottles and followed the goons out the door. The carrier had thousands of sailors, but they were all below, except for a few men needed to handle the planes. There was a group of 12 officers, some distance away. The goons and I walked to them. The officers seemed shocked to see me. I guess they had not been told the person being executed was an 18-year-old girl. It was lucky everybody else was below deck. I could have caused a mutiny. We arrived at the group of officers and waited while the jet plane was prepared. The oldest-looking officer said,
"They didn't tell me you were a girl."
I was right. They hadn't known. Would it have made a difference? Probably not. There were 3 female officers in this group. The captain probably thought the condemned man deserved a last look at females. One of the women asked my goons, "What did she do?"
"We don't know, ma'am."
"How long were you with her?"
"Since yesterday morning. She hasn't said 50 words. She's a tough little lady."
This triggered something in the young woman's brain. She thought I should have the opportunity to say something in my defense. Nobody had been given a protocol, so this young woman pulled out a cell phone from her pants pocket and boldly walked around the government men until she was almost in front of me. She held up the cell phone and activated the video mode. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked. I was nervous, but at this point I was more disgusted than nervous. "This is the most stupid thing ever done. I'm glad I won't be here to see what happens." She sounded disappointed.
"Is that all you have to say?"
My face softened. Yes, that was the wrong way to leave my family hanging. I once read a famous quote by the Shawnee Indian chief Timkesh about singing a death song and going out like a hero. I had rewritten it for more universal use, never dreaming I'd have to use it myself so soon. If people grieve your passing, enjoy in the good you did, and die like a hero going home, I feel good about who I was. She was more than satisfied with that. She was thrilled. Surely nothing better could be said. One of the goons said,
"Time to go."
Everybody advanced to the jet. I climbed a ladder and awkwardly got into the cockpit, still carrying the garbage bag of Coke bottles. A seaman on another ladder on the other side of the plane reached into the cockpit to get an oxygen mask, attached it to a long plastic tube. He put it on to make sure it was working.
"This is oxygen. You'll need it up there,"
he explained, and put the mask over my nose and mouth. An elastic strap around my head secured it in place. He waited a moment.
"Are you getting oxygen?"
I nodded. An X-shaped seatbelt was attached to my seat near my shoulders and by my hips. This was 2 belts stitched together over my chest. Given my small size and this device's tight fit, besides its impracticality for escaping the plane quickly, I guess they designed it just for me. The canopy was mounted on a heavy frame. The crewman lowered it like a closing clamshell and moved it forward. Something slid into place to lock the canopy. While all this was being done, the catapult cable was put on the boat hook. Everything was ready. The crewmen climbed down and the ladders were removed. The officers disappeared into the conjoining tower to watch the show. A couple minutes later, the jet engine of my plane started up. In 30 seconds, engine thrust reached a stable speed. They had to be checking for problems by remote control sensors. The plane was freed and the catapult engaged. I accelerated from 0 to 165 miles per hour in 2 seconds. The pressure on my back was unbelievable. It was unimaginable. The man had not exaggerated. The plane climbed steadily. There was no time to lose. I went to work immediately. First, the seatbelt harness had to go. I felt around the belt attachments next to my hips for release buttons. I couldn't find any. The belts seemed to disappear into metal slots. It was the same thing at my shoulders. There was no time to waste looking for the release mechanism. I reached my right hand down to grasp the belt at my left hip. I pulled and pulled with ever-increasing force. The belt stretched and grew thinner until it snapped with a dull pop. I repeated the procedure on the belt next to my right hip with my left hand. I did the same with the belt attachments at my shoulders, pulling forward with both hands, my back pressing against the seat to provide a counterforce. The harness was freed. It was much simpler to pull the stitched X in the middle apart. This gave me 2 belts. I tied 2 ends together to give me 1. Finally, I wrapped it around my waist and tied the other 2 ends together. This would keep the Coke bottles from moving below my waist. I wanted them to stay up around my chest. The jumpsuit had a zipper from the collar to the crotch. I unzipped it down to the makeshift belt. I checked the instrument panel. The important mechanical altimeter was easy to find. 11,320 feet. 2 miles. All right. I was doing well. I had time to do some of the bottles. I grabbed the garbage bag of Coke bottles and put it in my lap. I uncapped a bottle, pouring its contents on the floor, tore off a small piece of garbage bag, wrapped it over the opening of the empty bottle, and screwed the cap over the plastic-covered neck. That would make a watertight seal. The bottle went inside the jumpsuit under my left armpit. I did the same procedure with the second bottle, which went under my right armpit. And a third bottle went on my left side. A fourth bottle went on the right. The altimeter read 22,190 feet. I was doing great. More bottles were emptied, sealed with plastic and capped, and jammed into my jumpsuit. 11 bottles would provide enough buoyancy to keep my head well above water. The altimeter read 47,520 feet. I watched it carefully. It was nearly over. I thought once more of Steve, of the good times, of the funny moments, of the private hours. I now understood his purpose. He helped me walk over the unsteady ground to home. In him, I had a foretaste of the Father. The altimeter read 54,140 feet. It was time to go home. As a believer, I was sure I was immortal, and that gave me courage. I pulled off the oxygen mask and said a silent prayer in my head. Father, forgive me for all my sins. take me into your home forever. I stood up on the seat and turned around to face the rear of the plane. The canopy was a few inches above my head. I pushed my hands up against it hard. It didn't budge. I increased the pressure and kept increasing it. Still, it didn't move. How much pressure could I exert? I didn't know. There was never a reason to find out, but it had to be enormous. The canopy was moving. Something somewhere was distorting. Metal or something was being stretched, torn, destroyed. The canopy suddenly flew off. I instantly covered my face with my arms as my body was sucked out of the plane. I rapidly somersaulted head over heels. I was very afraid, because leaving the plane guaranteed my death. But I was nowhere near panicking. I knew there was a better world after this one. The first thing I noticed was the complete silence. The scream of the jet had only lasted a few seconds. As the plane moved away, it quickly went silent, except for my breathing, which sent throat sounds through my bone to my ear, where there was absolutely no sound. On the ground, there was always some background noise, even if it was a person not aware of it. Up here, there was nothing. The second thing I noticed was the extreme cold. My fingers went numb in seconds. Without the jumpsuit, I might already be dead. The bomb went off miles away. The light was so intense, I could see it through the flesh of my arms. As I fell, the air temperature climbed rapidly. A minute after leaving the plane, it was no longer cold enough to suck the heat right through my jumpsuit. I was keeping some of the heat. I still somersaulted wildly. I took my arms off my face, but kept my eyes shut. Films of skydivers showed them stretching their arms and legs out with knees slightly bent and arms back past the plane of the torso. This had the effect of a badminton shuttlecock, to keep the body falling true. I stretched out my arms and legs. Momentum from the somersaulting kept my body turning over in all kinds of angles, but the turning was slowing down. Finally, I stopped turning over. My body was in a stable, face-down position. The air temperature had passed into tolerable territory. I opened my eyes slightly, just enough to see something. The clouds were still far below. I closed my eyes for a while. I opened my eyes again and saw the cotton ball clouds just below. It appeared I was going to pass between two of them, somewhat close to me. I reached the top of the cloud layer, fell between the half-mile thick clouds, and finally, I was below them. I'd been falling for minutes. Choppy waves in the thousands were visible on the ocean surface. The strong wind that buffeted my hair on the carrier deck stirred the water. I was glad to see the waves. They'd make it possible to know exactly when I'd hit the water. The waves appeared larger every second. Their approach seemed to speed up, and I knew there were only seconds left. Once again, I covered my face with my arms. My body made a hard belly flop. I was knocked out. The waves brushing my face were stimulating. I regained consciousness. It was the South Atlantic, far below the equator, and for the Southern Hemisphere, June was like December in the North. The water was ice cold. My feet and ankles hurt, but there was no escaping it. I started whimpering. The cold sank deeper into my bones. I yelled and thrashed the water. It got worse and worse. Now I was close to panic and screamed. Dying was bad enough. How painful would this get? In a couple minutes, my lower legs went numb. The skin all over my body was losing nervous sensation. My screaming stopped, to be replaced with intermittent whimpering and groans. It was nearly over now. I quieted down. It was time. All accounts were settled. All debts were paid. I had no more use for this world. I passed out.
And so Theresa died, and they all lived happily ever after because the book ceased to exist. The end.
I really need to figure out a better solution, because currently I am recording under a blanket because my brilliant toad idea didn't really work out.
The only problem is this blanket is very, very, very heavy, and I can't really do this for forever. Whatever. I'll probably just go to Walmart and get a cheap one that's thin. Anyway, hopefully I'll have Chapter 5 out for you guys sooner than 2 months. Although, don't hold me to it, because Chapters 5 and 6 are, if you watch Crimson Rogue, you already know, they're the recap chapters. And I am not looking forward to them. Especially because I have to talk in a voice for Prime Minister Blair, and I don't know how I want him to sound yet. Because I do an awful British accent. And to top it off, you need me to do a guy British accent. So look forward to that, I guess. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys tonight. I'll see you sooner or later, and I hope you guys also have a good night. Or morning. Or whenever you're watching this. Bye.